Welcome to Detroit. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and 3 toes. I will beat your ass. You can drown them. And that's what we gotta be. That's who we have to be. Because that's our domain. That is our domain. Because we'll tread water as long as it takes to fucking bury you.
Takes the snap, turns, gives to Montgomery, right side, end zone, touchdown, Detroit Lions! Yes.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. So, as we all know, folks, the Lions just got done wrapping up a massive contract extension for Aiden Hutchinson. Just signed him to a huge 4-year, $180 million deal. Now, obviously, everyone is excited about that news. Everybody's like, great, we got another core player signed up. We've gotten a lot of our core players, extended. They're going to be around for a long time. There's obviously a few more deals that the Lions have to negotiate and try and take care of. Obviously, they still got to figure out a deal for Gibbs. Still got to figure out a deal for Branch, Laporta, and Campbell. But chances are those deals are probably not going to come until this offseason or until next year, once the Lions have kind of figured out where their cap space situation is going to be going into next year. And chances are that's not going to get figured out until the Lions can probably rework Jared Goff's contract, probably restructure it to open up some much-needed cap space. But the Lions are definitely in a good space, definitely in a good spot going into next year as far as being able to make all that work. But when we're having this conversation that we're about to have, we're not dealing with, okay, what's going to happen in the next couple of months from now. We're dealing with more what's happening right now or what could potentially happen within the next week. And what I'm specifically referring to is, of course, the trade deadline. Obviously, there is a lot of chatter. There is a lot of speculation. There are rumors that are being floated around that the Lions could be in the market to make a trade before the deadline enacts sometime next week. And I know that for Lions fans in particular, the thought of making a trade right now is something that they would really, really like to see. Because for them, it's like, okay, if Brad Holmes, after signing or extending Aiden Hutchinson, then goes out and makes a trade for somebody, that would then show that the Lions are all in about trying to get a Super Bowl this year. And that's what everybody's focus is on for this particular season, is if you're a Lions fan, is, okay, are the Lions actually going to go all in to try and get to a Super Bowl by making a move at the deadline to bring in somebody who could particularly, in their opinion, help them out to get to the next level, to get to that Super Bowl, to get to winning that first Lombardi trophy. So let's actually think about this rationally, shall we? I know that when it comes to the trade market, there have been 3 positions in particular that have been floating around as potential options that the Lions could make moves for to bring somebody in for. Now, what are those positions? The positions are as follows. Obviously, edge rusher, cornerback is another, and then offensive tackle, with somebody who specifically is more associated or experienced with playing the blind side, the left tackle position. Now, if we be honest with ourselves, 2 of these positions would be primarily for people that could come in, that would be able to play and contribute either right away or could contribute right away. The third one would be for somebody that is there in case there is a problem that should arise with, a player not being able to play due to injury. And obviously everybody knows that that is primarily associated with the situation that's going on with Taylor Decker. So let's think about this. when it comes to the cornerback particular situation, everybody is talking about, okay, we already know that the Lions have a really good starting unit in terms of their defensive backs. We know that we've got DJ Reed that's coming back sometime probably in the next week or two from his hamstring injury that he suffered against the Cleveland Browns. Okay, that guy is coming back. Chances are very, very likely that we're going to get back, obviously, Terry and Arnold this week because he has fully practiced the last 2 days, and chances are he'll be able to play against the Vikings. We know we're getting back Branch this week from his suspension. Then we know that Kirby Joseph is most likely going to be back next week or the week after that after dealing with all the stuff that he's been dealing with, which has been primarily minor, but has been nagging him throughout the course of the season. But the point of the matter that I'm trying to draw at here is that the starting unit as far as the defensive backs should be back altogether within the next week or two. Now, does that merit the Lions potentially making a move to go out and make a trade? The truthful answer to this is yes, potentially. Now, what does that potential all hinge upon? Well, much like anything else, it hinges upon cost. And not just in terms of cap space. Because as I just literally stated when I opened this episode, the Lions just handed out a massive extension to Aiden Hutchinson. They've got 4 more deals that they've got to potentially figure out how they're going to get, taken care of with the cap space going into next year. And chances are they're most likely going to have to restructure Jared Goff's contract. But as they currently sit right now, I think the Lions have close to like $24-25 million still left in this current season. So, if you wanted to try and make a move for this particular year, you do have the cap space to make that work. The question is do you want to potentially make that move knowing you've still got all these other contracts that you've got to potentially negotiate that are coming up? That's where the rub kind of comes in. The other part of where the rub comes in is what exactly are you willing to give up in terms of trade compensation? Because let's be entirely honest with ourselves. Cornerbacks do not come cheap, especially good ones. Now, do the Lions need to trade for a top cornerback? Do they need to trade for a top defensive back? No, they most certainly don't. We've already seen that even if when we don't have our starting defensive back unit out there, they can still play at a really damn high level. We just had a game against the Bucs where it was primarily backups playing, and we shut down one of the hottest offensive units in the NFL, held them to under 10 points, held them to 9 actually, and just had an absolutely great game. So if I was Brad Holmes, I wouldn't necessarily feel the urge, if you will, to say, okay, I really have to go out and I really have to make a move for getting another defensive back. But if the price is right and it can only add further to this defensive back room, then absolutely you consider it. Absolutely you take a look at it and say, okay, is what we are potentially going to get out of this deal more than what we're potentially going to have to give up? Now, what's the primary guy that everybody is thinking about when it comes to this whole conversation, when it comes to the defensive backs? Obviously, the one name that has been floated around quite a bit for the defensive backs would be cornerback Tariq Woolen of the Seattle Seahawks. And the only reason that his name is being floated around is because, well, right now, he's just not playing a whole lot with the Seahawks. Ever since Coach McDonald got there, the Seahawks have just not really been using him a whole lot. Now, let's understand what we know about Tariq Woolen. Tariq Woolen is a big cornerback. The guy has a lot of physical characteristics that you would like out of him. He's very physically imposing. He's very physically, a cornerback that is going to be able to occupy or shut down a particular area if you were to bring him in. He hasn't always played the greatest under Coach McDonald's, system out there in Seattle, but prior to that, he was actually a really damn solid cornerback. So, if you bring him in and then you pair him with DJ Reed, you pair him with Terry and Arnold, you pair him with, Amik Robertson and all those other guys that we have, that's only going to further strengthen that defensive secondary, which, let's just call for what it is. When we start moving into these later months in the year, when, quarterbacks are going to be at their tip-top game, you're going to have wide receivers that are going to be at their tip-top game. It never, ever hurts to have more cornerback options to add more potential coverage to try and slow that down. That's always going to be something that brings value to a team. However, though, you have to sincerely ask yourself, does it make really any sense? While in one aspect it makes some sense, to me it doesn't, because you still have to consider these little facets. Number one, the Lions are probably going to also have to figure out how to bring back Amik Robertson, because I think when we brought him in last year, we only signed him, I think, to what was it, a 2-year deal or something like that? So we're going to have to rework a contract for him. Then on top of that, you have all these other guys that have really stepped up in the defensive secondary that Kelvin Shepard literally just said, hey, they just kind of put a notice on for all the starters that, hey, we can't be lackadaisical in our approach. We have to step up our game, and we have to continue to play the way that we know we need to play. So if you think about it from that perspective, what real incentivization, what real motivation is there for Brad Holmes to go out and make a trade for a Tariq Woolen? There really isn't much of one. Really, if you were to make that trade, all you're doing is continuing to add to what you already have. It's not like you're missing anything. It's not like you have some massive hole in your defensive secondary that you absolutely need filled. And even if you did, like I just stated, we're going to be getting a lot of these guys back within the next week or two. So do you really want to make a trade for somebody that primarily is going to once again be sitting on the bench within a week or two should you have an injury? I mean, you can try and, game plan to state, okay, well, if we have an injury, we have a guy that's ready to step in. But we've had injuries and we've already had guys that have stepped in. So realistically, what's the motivation there? There's not much of one. So, okay, is it possible that the Lions could make a trade for Tariq Woolen? It's possible, but I would state it's highly unlikely. Okay, then, so that brings us to the edge rushing room. Now, we already know that Lions fans desperately want to get an upgrade opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. They desperately do. They absolutely would love to get another big-time playmaker opposite of Hutchinson to really beef up that pass rush, which then in turn, like I was just talking about, would also help out the defensive passing secondary. Because it's like, as we already know, what's the best friend of a defensive pass rush? A good defensive secondary. And what's the best friend of a good defensive secondary? A good defensive pass rush. They go hand in hand. They're a match made in heaven. They're a defensive marriage. But here's the problem. Edge rushers are even more expensive than cornerbacks. Why? Because tip-top edge rushers are hard to come by. There's a reason why over the entire course of this year, going back into the offseason, the edge rushing, market has just absolutely ballooned itself. I mean, for crying out loud, you've seen TJ Watt get a new deal. You've seen Max Crosby get a new deal. You've seen Myles Garrett get a new deal. You've seen Trey Hendrickson get a new deal. You've seen Micah Parsons get a new deal. And we just saw Aiden Hutchinson get a new deal. And all of those deals are $100 plus, $150 plus million deals. They're very expensive. So, what exactly is the thought process here? The thought process here is if, again, you're serious about winning a Super Bowl right now, you go out and you go get another tip-top, edge rusher to play opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. So that way your defense is as souped up as you can possibly make it going into the second half of the season and going into the home stretch run for the playoffs, and obviously for the Super Bowl. That's the reasoning. That's the thought process. That's the logic. Again, however, though, the problem is cost. And it's even more prevalent of a problem when we're talking about edge rushers. Because, again, edge rushers, even good ones are hard to come by. Great ones are almost impossible to get your hands on. But if you're looking for a solid to good one, it's still going to cost you a decent damn amount of resources and money. Which then brings us to the guys that we're currently talking about right now that the Lions could be potentially interested in bringing in. We've had guys mentioned like Jalen Phillips of the Miami Dolphins. We've had guys mentioned like Cam Jordan of the New Orleans Saints. These are guys that names have been floated around as because the teams that they play for, they're currently not going to go anywhere. They're not really good. So at this point, for those teams, they're already looking forward to next year. And when you're looking forward to next year, what's the one thing you potentially want to get your hands more of? You want to get more draft capital. You want to get more resources. So that way it's like, okay, moving into next year, we have those resources to make those moves, whether it's opening up more cap space, whether it's getting more draft resources, whatever the case might be. But therein lies the problem, because for the Lions, chances are if they're going to bring in somebody, it's going to cost them in some manner or facet, whether it's in terms of a decent number of draft picks, or if they are actually interested in potentially keeping that player around for, more than just not even a 1 year rental, it would be a half a season rental, they're going to have to sign him to an extension as well. So if you start thinking about that, it really limits who you could potentially bring in. Because let's be honest with ourselves. The Lions are not going to trade for a guy like Trey Hendrickson for a half a season rental. They're not going to do that. The Lions are a team that have shown with all the contract extensions that they have handed out that if they bring somebody in, they like them. They want to keep them around long term. They want to be able to have them for more than just a half a season or a full year. Guys like what happened, with Zadarius Smith, or what's happened with other guys like, what's his name? Tim Patrick, those are anomalies. They don't typically make moves for guys like that and just say, okay, you know what? We're going to bring you in for a half a season or maybe for a full year, and then we're going to move off you, or you know what? We're just not going to be able to bring you back. And you have to think about it. The whole thought process I just talked about, especially with Zadarius Smith, plays heavily into this whole thought process. Because the Lions could have brought back Zadarius Smith at any point that they wanted to, but they decided not to. Because it's not like when Zadarius Smith signed with the Eagles, it was for a whole hell of a lot of money. It was, a 1 year, $9 million contract? That's piddling's change for the Lions. They could have made that deal work. They chose not to. And there's a reason why they chose not to. They've already got guys that they feel are good enough with what they have. Because think about it. You already got Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden Hutchinson ain't going nowhere. That's more than abundantly clear. But then, on the opposite side of him, Al-Quadin Muhammad is playing at a really damn good level. He doesn't look like he's going anywhere as well. And if he continues to play at the level he's been playing, the Lions are going to want to keep him around for at least another couple of years. So you got to factor in that at some point, the Lions are probably going to have a conversation with him about signing him to a contract. Then, on top of that, the Lions know that at some point, they're going to get back Pascal. They're going to get back Davenport. So, okay, think about that. You've got two guys that you've already got potentially coming back very shortly in terms of injury, waiting in the wings. You've also signed in guys earlier in the season, such as Wheat and the other guy that I can't remember off the top of my head, that's already there. So just based off of what you currently have, you've got at least 4, 5, 6 different guys that can play that edge rushing position, and you don't really need to bring anybody else for depth. If you're going to bring in somebody, it's going to be so that way you have more of a starting rotation in that regard. And as Kelvin Shepard already pretty much stated, that's going to be primarily for the guy opposite of Hutchinson, because Hutchinson's not going to want to step off the field unless he absolutely decides that he has to or wants to. So it's primarily, okay, you're wanting to bring in a guy to rotate with the guy opposite of Hutch, which at this point is Al-Quadin Muhammad. Well, realistically, you have to think about it. Is Jalen Phillips playing better than Al-Quadin Muhammad? No, he's not. First and foremost, even though he's an edge rusher, Phillips is more of a freaking linebacker than he is an edge rusher. He can still line up in an edge rushing role, but he's more of a linebacker. And the Lions don't really need linebacking help because, oh, that's right, we're about to get Rodrigo back. We still have Anzalone, we still have Barnes, we still have Campbell. So it's like, what realistic need is there? There isn't any. And Kelvin Shepherd also just stated yesterday, if it's for a linebacker, that's not a plug-and-play kind of mindset because the schematics and the whole way that the defense operates, that takes weeks to learn. So if you were to bring in Jalen Phillips, he wouldn't be able to play right away. He would have to take at least a couple of weeks to learn the defense before the Lions felt comfortable enough putting him out there. So if you were to make a decision like this, it would have to be for an actual edge rusher that would be primarily a hand down in the dirt, kind of guy like Hutchinson or Al-Quadin Muhammad. And let's call it for what it is. The only guys that realistically would be upgrades at this point would be guys like Trey Hendrickson's level. Because I like Cam Jordan. And Cam Jordan would fit very perfectly into that potential like half a season rental as he would, probably like to go out and win a Super Bowl. But the one thing we know about the Saints is that they do not like trading away guys that they have had for a long time. And Cam Jordan has been in New Orleans, I think ever since he got drafted there. So the chances that the Saints are going to want to trade him away unless, he absolutely states, yeah, this is what I want to go and chase a Super Bowl, chances are it's not likely going to happen. So again, I see the reasoning. I see the logic why, fans would want this and why it would make sense to the Lions to potentially do it. But does it really make sense to the Lions to actually make that move? Not really. They've already got guys there. The guys that they have in their starting lineup are already playing very well. They're about to get guys back from injury that are going to add even more depth and rotation to that whole thing. So trading for somebody like that does not make a whole hell of a lot of sense in my book. Which then brings us to the last potential option that the Lions could bring in as a trade option, which would be somebody who could be behind Taylor Decker in case that his shoulder injury continues to act up and he can't play. That, to me, I think is the most likely option. But again, the problem is that tackles are a very hard commodity to come by, especially if they're even halfway decent ones. And in this case, as a backup, it would be relatively difficult to get your hands on a decent one. But on the top of that, the Lions have already proven that if they need somebody to step in, they have guys, or they have a guy that, hey, you know what? If necessary, we can plug him in for a game or two and we'll be okay. Will it be on the same level as Taylor Decker? No, obviously it won't. Taylor Decker is one of the better left tackles in the NFL. You're not going to be able to replace that with a backup. But you have to honestly ask yourself this. If you can't replace that with a backup, then what the hell difference does it make to go out and possibly trade or get somebody else? You're not going to be able to get the same level of talent from a backup that what you've already got with Taylor Decker. And, oh, by the way, who is the current backup to Taylor Decker? That would be Dan Skipper. Dan Skipper is a fan favorite. Dan Skipper has proven that in a pinch you can plug him in and he's going to be able to do the job. Again, not as good as Taylor Decker, but he can get the job done. So to me, it's like, okay here. Could you make a trade for somebody to bring in that would be better than Dan Skipper, but not as good as Taylor Decker? Yeah, you could. But the problem is that when you're putting yourself in that very narrow window between those two in terms of the talent level, because you have Taylor Decker up here and you have Dan Skipper down here, that kind of limits what you can potentially try and poach to bring somebody that's kind of right there in the middle. There's not going to be a lot of guys that are going to fit that area. And again, if there's one thing we know about the trade market is that teams, especially when they're trying to, deal with teams like the Lions, they know that that's what they're trying to make that move for. They're trying to bulk up. They're trying to add so that way they can go on a Super Bowl run. And depending upon who the team they're dealing with is, they might try and price gouge them. The Lions know that. So it all comes down to, okay, is the deal worthwhile for the Lions in terms of what they're having to give up, number one, but also does it make sense based upon what they already have or what's about to come back in the first place? And honestly, when I take a look at all these, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The only way that a trade, in my opinion, happens at the trade deadline or slightly before it is if the deal is so damn good, there's no way Brad Holmes could pass it up. But is there an inherent need? Is there just, how do I put this? Is there just some absolute hole that Brad Holmes has to go out and fill that he must make a move for? No, there really isn't. The Lions are in a really damn good spot. The people that want to trade right now are those that just absolutely want to see the Lions have a headline of, oh, made massive trade for some type of player and now we're winning the headline game for a couple of days. The Lions don't care about winning headlines unless it's the only headline of stating Lions won Super Bowl. That's the only headline they care about. They don't care about if they won the draft. They don't care about if they won free agency, if they won the trade deadline. They couldn't give a rat's ass about that. What they care about is winning the Super Bowl. And right now, any type of trade that they're looking at, pretty much most of them, unless they do an all-out swing for the fences kind of trade, which they almost never do, that's not going to be something that's going to make that big of a difference. So to me, it's like, could the Lions potentially make a move? Yeah, they could. But what's the likelihood that they are? I would say probably less than 25%. And that's me being generous. So I get it. You know, a lot of Lions fans would love to see the Lions make a trade, make a move to show that they're all in. But let me just pose this thought process to you right now. What's to say the Lions already aren't all in because they've already done all the groundwork prior to this to where they don't have to go out and make a trade? That if by going out and making a trade, all you're doing is just adding another mouth to feed that you don't need to put in. That's a thought process I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. I think the Lions are in a good spot right now, and they don't need to, mess up what they've already got or, how do I put this, imbalance the balance that they already have. They're in a good spot, folks. Leave it be. If Brad Holmes decides to bring somebody in because the cost is just too damn good and they're a really good player, that's fine. I'm not gonna bemoan that at all. But I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective here, and I just don't see it happening. So if it happens, great. I'll be absolutely ecstatic. But if it doesn't happen, I sure as hell ain't going to be surprised because that's where my thinking is. And I'm pretty confident that that's where Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell's thinking is. Unless it's a really great deal, they're probably not going to bounce on anything. That's just my thought process. But anyway, folks, I've come to the end of this episode. Whether or not you agree with me, I'm sure I'm going to get some comments on it. Some people might think I'm being short-sighted. Some people might think I'm being brilliant. Whatever the case might be, I just want to say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. I also encourage y'all to do one of these three things, like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you not yet had a chance to do so, want to encourage y'all to make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you guys never miss any more content that I'm posting, so that way you guys can instantaneously come right back to the channel and you never have to worry about missing anything. Hope y'all are doing well. Hope y'all got something in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.